Hello, it's John Heaton, and today I'm going to talk about a book I've just finished reading by my friend James Griffiths, and it's this book about Squeeze, covering the peak years 1978 to 1982, called The Pop Music Played, and he kindly sent me a free copy over Christmas, and sorry it's taken so long, James, to read it. I had a bit of a backlog, but I got to it recently, thoroughly enjoyed it, very well written. James has written for major newspapers in the past, and you can tell he's got a very good, engaging writing style and quite a lot of humour in here. And basically he educated me a lot about Squeeze, because I must admit I'm one of these people who he kind of gently refers to in the book as regarding Squeeze as a little bit of a singles band, and I haven't really explored the albums, and I've always felt a bit guilty about that, because most of the bands I like in my collection, I have at least investigated their albums, and Squeeze was one of the ones where it really wasn't the case, with a couple of recent exceptions. I'll just take you through the history of, before I talk about the book. I always had this greatest hits, not the 45s and under. This is an expanded greatest hits, which covers all the way up to the end of the 80s, I think. And that was my primary introduction to Squeeze. I was aware of the singles, and I was just realising the other day that Squeeze actually played at our graduation ball at Exeter University on June the 28th, 1985. And I was there and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I seem to remember, although I couldn't tell you the track listing. I was aware of the singles, particularly Up the Junction and Cool for Cats. But as I've learnt through reading James's book, I've listened to quite a few of the albums, including all the albums covered in this book. And they really were a welcome surprise. It wasn't just the singles I liked, there's a lot of hidden album gems in there. And so I thoroughly enjoyed that. And one thing James points out is a lot of people assumed that a lot of the hits on here were big hits in the charts, but actually that wasn't the case. And I was very surprised to read, for example, that Another Lane in My Heart only reached number 17 in the charts, and Pulling Muscles from a Shell only 44, which is a travesty, really. Cool for Cats, Up the Junction, both number 2, Labelled with Love, number 4. Those three did well. Take Me On Yours got up to 19 with a bit of help from a performance from On Top of the Pops. And in the USA, Tempted got all the way to number 8, although it didn't even crack the top 40 in the UK, unbelievably. James is quite amusing in the book, talking about Cool for Cats couldn't quite get to number 1 because Bright Eyes by Art Garfunkel kept it off the top, and he describes that song as the Garfunkel's saccharine ode to endangered rabbits. I thought it was quite amusing. And also Up the Junction was kept off number 1 by Our Friends Electric by Tube Army, and James is a little bit more complimentary about that one. But there's a good bits of humour in here. Let me just take you to the bits I've highlighted. What's this bit? Black coffee. Oh yeah, Black Coffee in Bed. He's very dismissive of this track, and basically because Glenn hated it. And I'm not sure if he's quoting Glenn or quoting himself here in the book. It wasn't that the song was bad, its lyric was both sophisticated and heartfelt, its tune achingly beautiful, but the tempo was just ever so slightly too slow, even ploddy. As a result, the dragging melody had the effect of elongating certain vocal phrases. In the chorus, it turned Tilbrook's performance into a self-pitying wail. Well, I've never thought that about Black Coffee in Bed. I've always thoroughly enjoyed it as a single off the Hits album, with Elvis Costello singing the backing vocals. I'm Out With a Friend, which I always thought, by the way, was I'm Out With Her Friends, which takes on a bit of a different meaning. But anyway, interesting that James is not pouring praise on every single track. He's quite prepared to say something doesn't work if he thinks it doesn't. There's an amusing story of Chris and Glenn visiting Polo recording studios in Stockholm with Frida from ABBA, and James writes, momentarily overawed by the wood-pined walls and marble-covered floors, Chris pulled himself together. I don't know if I'd want to record here, he muttered to the Smash Hits journalist while Frida was out of earshot. It'd feel like making an album in an ideal home exhibition. So that was quite amusing. Polo Recording Studios is where ABBA recorded all of their albums. I think more or less without exception. Maybe the Voulez-Vous one was recorded elsewhere, I can't quite remember. There's a great story in here. Towards the end of the book, the 11-year-old James being taken to Blackpool and coming across a button badge stall with all the rock bands of the day having badges and inquiring whether they had any Squeeze ones, and the woman hadn't heard of Squeeze, and James reminded her that Squeeze had various hits which she recognised, and then she said, come back in an hour, I'll have a look round the back. And then he came back in an hour and she'd found three badges round the back, and James says it's rather ironic that Squeeze, the badges existed but they weren't on display because they weren't kind of as in your face as other names of the day, and they weren't. It's true that they didn't have much of an image in terms of, one couldn't really identify. Up until recently, I didn't know any of the members beyond Difford and Tilbrook. Now I've done a bit of research and I know obviously the core lineup with Gilson Lavis on drums, Jules Holland on keys, and John Bentley on bass for the most part of this period, which we're talking about. And then Paul Carrack joined on keyboards to sing the famous Tempted song. So I know a bit more than I used to. But I have to say they didn't do themselves any favours with their album covers. This is a couple of singles. I'm going to talk about the end of the book, by the way, which is great in a minute. But so this is my son's Cool for Cats single on cool pink vinyl, love it, with a decent cover, and that design of Squeeze on the back is the one James has used on the back to have his portrait taken there. She thought this was quite cool for Cats. And then this is the picture sleeve of Up the Junction, which is again on coloured vinyl. They did quite a few on coloured vinyl. And this probably has their best image, as James says in the book, the cover single for Up the Junction. Excellent image. But I'm sorry to say their album covers, almost without exception, pretty much sucked. I mean, this is a dreadful cover, and a pretty anonymous back cover. This is my son's copy of Cool for Cats. East Side Story, which James kindly sent me, has a slightly better cover, but it's not a brilliant picture of the band. They look a bit tired. And again, the back doesn't exactly leap out at you. And this Sweets from a Stranger, which I picked up, can't remember where I picked this up. I think it was in Hungary, but I haven't seen many Squeeze records in Hungary. I'm always on the lookout, but they didn't do very well in Europe. This is not a very good cover, is it? Not a very good back cover either. And is it this album with it? Oh no, it's the next one. This one has the lyrics, which is good. This one I did find in Hungary at an outside market stall, Babylon and On. Dreadful cover, look at that. Back cover slightly better with pictures of the band, but very difficult to read all these credits. I had to search to see which track Del Newman is on this album, and it's the track, I think it's the track The Waiting Game. Yeah, it's The Waiting Game. But here, the lyrics are on here, but almost impossible to read. I mean, look at that. I think the same trick was tried with Imperial Bedroom, Elvis Costello, and similarly difficult to read. So they didn't do themselves any favours with their album covers. And just take you back to the ending of this book, because James does a superb sort of summary of why Squeeze weren't popular and why they had the solid fan base and etc., etc. Comparing Squeeze to their peers, it's curiously easy to define them by what they weren't. They weren't ideologues like The Clash. They weren't pin-ups like The Police. They weren't aggressive like The Jam. They weren't edgy like Elvis Costello. They weren't wacky like Madness. They weren't exotic like Adam Ant. They weren't intellectual like Gang of Four. They weren't arty like XTC. They weren't multicultural like The Specials. unlike several of their most visible contemporaries, they had no political agenda and never claimed to speak for their audience, which I think is one of the reasons they've lasted the test of time. So their music's certainly not dated. And James concludes the book in great style. In myriad interviews over the years, Glenn and Chris predicted that Squeeze would outlast the majority of their competitors. Despite the struggles and disappointments along the way, this has indeed come to pass. Squeeze, the South East London band, who reluctantly hitched a ride on the new wave juggernaut, imploded before their time, reformed and broke up, and reformed again, still remain standing, their legacy bottled and labelled with love. Wonderful ending, James, well written. Which brings me on to the videos. I have had this for a number of years. I've never really got beyond the first half. Same with this. I never made it to the end of this with any great satisfaction, because I always felt that the latter songs were not of the same standard, and I probably on the whole do feel that's the case. But watching the videos last night, I was struck by how good the video for Hourglass was, and actually got me into the song, so that was good. And out of the other latter day ones, I thought Some Fantastic Place is a masterpiece and very spiritual. Reminded me of My Sweet Lord, actually, with the choruses and stuff. And the great guitar solo from Glenn in the middle, which Chris says was inspired by Jimi Hendrix. So, of the main videos, I mean, a couple of them were recorded in Tittenhurst Park in Lennon's kitchen, apparently, but I watched the videos, and if they were, it's heavily disguised. It doesn't look like a millionaire's kitchen. It looks a bit run down and cluttered, with a kind of metal basin in the corner and a sort of shitty modern window. So I don't know what they did to it to make it look different, but certainly didn't recognise it from the imagined film kitchen. It may well have been the same room, but it just didn't look like it. And in Cool for Cats, filmed, I'm sure, at Tittenhurst, but I didn't recognise any of the scenery. And this massive pipe organ behind them, I don't think was a Lennon. I don't think it was owned by Lennon or Ringo, who owned the house at the time. So I'm not sure what that was about. They probably brought it in with them. Of the main videos, I think Another Lane in My Heart is easily the best. I think it's brilliant. I love the bit where they're standing at the bar singing the chorus. Particularly Chris is pretty cool in that. And all five members of the band are singing the chorus along in unison. It's great. Pulling Muscles wasn't a video. They didn't make a video for it, unbelievably. This is a live version on here. And Labelled with Love. Again, no video for a huge hit single. And maybe they thought they can't make a video with an old lady. Wouldn't endear themselves to MTV, which was just around the corner. But still, they could have come up with some kind of video, even if it was symbolic or something. But they didn't. Still managed to get to number 4 without that. Is That Love is a very strange video, because it's in this kind of faded picture, and it looks as if, actually reminds, it was probably intended to be artsy, but it actually reminded me of a bad quality VHS cassette on about its 10th copy, with the grainy picture, and quite annoying to watch, actually, if I'm honest. Tempted is a better video. I like the way that Glenn and Chris in the background contributed to this song, with Paul singing, although they wrote it, with Paul singing, doing the backing vocals and taking a back seat. Quite happy to take a back seat. That was quite nice to see. Black Coffee in Bed is a good video as well. So I enjoyed watching this, and there's a concert from 1982 from the Regal Theatre, which I will be checking out soon. So that was Squeeze. So thank you, James, again for the book and for getting me into Squeeze and exploring their back catalogue. I'm still a million miles away from being an expert in your eyes, James, or yours, Richard McCook, so bear with me. I'll get there. I'll certainly get familiar with and already listened to the first 5 albums, and I think they're all pretty decent. I was particularly impressed and surprised. I knew Argy Bargy and East Side Story would be good, but the first 2, I was kind of blown away by how good they were. And although the lyrics are maybe a little bit dated and have their issues, I really enjoyed their first 2 albums. And Sweets from a Stranger I'm in the middle of listening to now, and it's more mellow and it's not quite so sort of fun as the other albums, but we'll see. I haven't reached a verdict on that one yet, but the other first 4, brilliant. So thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you next time.